The gift I gave my CEO at the company Christmas party cost exactly $4.73. A USB drive, basic, black, 16 gigabytes. Inside that USB drive was evidence of 18 months of systematic harassment, $85,000 in fraudulent expense reports, an ongoing affair with a subordinate employee, and a pattern of abuse that had destroyed at least 4 women's careers over 6 years. I wrapped it in gold paper with a red velvet ribbon, added a card that said, "Your performance review, Merry Christmas, Secret Santa." When Greg Thompson, our CEO, opened it in front of 200 employees at our annual Christmas party and plugged that USB drive into the laptop connected to the projector screen, his entire career collapsed in approximately 45 seconds. My name is Rachel Morrison. I'm 42 years old and I've worked in marketing for 20 years. For the past 8 years, I've been the marketing director at Tech Vision Solutions, a mid-sized software company in Seattle. This is the story of how I documented a predator's pattern of abuse with such precision that even a complicit HR department couldn't protect him. How I waited 18 months for the perfect moment to expose him, and how a company tradition designed for holiday cheer became the vehicle for long overdue justice. But to understand why that $4 USB drive was so perfectly, devastatingly effective, I need to go back to where it started. June 16th, a Thursday afternoon, Greg Thompson's corner office on the 20th floor, overlooking Elliott Bay. I'd been called in to discuss what Greg described in his calendar invite as an exciting career opportunity. I walked in expecting to finally hear about the vice president of marketing role I'd been promised for over a year. Instead, Greg closed his office door, sat on the edge of his desk rather than behind it, and suggested we discuss my career advancement over dinner. Not a professional dinner with other executives. Not a working lunch with an agenda. Dinner. Saturday night. Just the two of us. At Daniel's Broiler, one of the most romantic restaurants in Seattle. The way he said it made his intentions unmistakable. This wasn't about mentorship or professional development. This was Greg Thompson, married CEO in his mid-50s, propositioning me. I kept my expression neutral and my voice professional. I said I appreciated the offer, but I kept my weekends reserved for family time. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting during normal business hours to discuss the VP role and what the timeline looked like. Greg's demeanor changed instantly. The warmth disappeared from his voice. His posture shifted. He stood up, walked behind his desk, and said we'd find time to discuss it when his schedule permitted. The meeting was over. I'd been dismissed. I left his office with an uneasy feeling in my stomach. I'd worked in corporate America long enough to recognize what had just happened. I'd been tested. I'd failed the test by declining, and there would be consequences. I was right. Within 1 week, my standing one-on-one meeting with Greg, which had been on his calendar every Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon for 3 years, was canceled. His assistant sent a brief email saying Greg was restructuring his meeting schedule and would let me know when the one-on-ones would resume. They never resumed. 2 weeks after I'd declined the dinner invitation, Greg sent me an email about a campaign strategy I'd proposed. The strategy was solid. I'd presented similar approaches before and received praise. This time, Greg's response was terse and critical. This needs significant improvement. The approach lacks strategic depth. See me to discuss. When I tried to schedule time to discuss his feedback, his assistant told me he was too busy. She'd get back to me with available times. She never did. 3 weeks in, I was excluded from the monthly executive leadership meeting. I'd attended that meeting every single month for 4 years. It was where major company decisions were made, where strategy was set, where the leadership team aligned on priorities. Suddenly, I wasn't invited. I asked Greg's assistant about it. She looked uncomfortable and said the meeting format was being restructured. She'd let me know when I'd be added back to the invite list. I never was. A month after the dinner invitation, Greg announced that the vice president of marketing position, the role I'd been promised, the role I'd been preparing for, the role everyone in the company knew I'd earned, was being filled by an external hire. Her name was Stephanie Chen. She had less experience than me. Her track record was mediocre. She knew nothing about our company, our products, or our market. But she got the job I'd been promised. I requested a meeting with Greg to understand why I hadn't been considered. After 3 weeks of being told he was too busy, he finally agreed to see me. I sat in his office and asked directly, what had changed? Why wasn't I promoted? Greg leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and delivered what was clearly a prepared response. He said there were concerns about my leadership capabilities, that the executive team, which I was no longer invited to meet with, felt I wasn't ready for the VP level, that I needed to focus on improving my performance in my current role before thinking about advancement. I was stunned. My performance reviews had always been excellent. My team consistently exceeded targets. I had strong relationships across the company. What concerns was he talking about? I asked for specifics. Greg said it wasn't any one thing, just a general sense that I lacked the strategic thinking and executive presence needed for a VP role. He suggested I work on being more collaborative, more receptive to feedback, and more professional in my interactions. The words were carefully chosen, vague enough to be difficult to dispute, coded enough to avoid explicit discrimination, damaging enough to justify blocking my advancement. I left that meeting feeling like I'd been slapped. But I'm not someone who accepts defeat without understanding what I'm facing. I went back to my office and pulled up every email, every meeting note, every performance review from the past year. The timeline was undeniable. Before June 16th, praise for my work, inclusion in leadership discussions, promises of the VP promotion, positive feedback, collaborative relationship with Greg. After June 16th, criticism of my work, exclusion from leadership meetings, VP role given to someone else, negative feedback, hostile relationship with Greg. The dividing line was the day I declined his dinner invitation. This was retaliation. Clear, obvious, textbook retaliation. I considered going to HR, but I hesitated. Greg had been CEO for 12 years. He was well liked by the board, popular with investors, seen as the company's visionary leader. The HR director, a man named Tom Carlson, reported directly to Greg and had been his loyal supporter for years. Would HR protect me, or would they protect Greg? I decided to wait, to watch, to document everything. That decision saved my career and eventually destroyed his. Over the next 6 months, Greg's campaign against me intensified in ways both subtle and overt. In team meetings, he'd single me out with questions clearly designed to make me look unprepared. He'd ask for data I couldn't possibly have memorized, then express disappointment when I didn't have immediate answers. He'd interrupt my presentations with skeptical questions. He'd dismiss my proposals, then present nearly identical ideas himself a week later, as if they were brilliant innovations. My annual performance review, which had always included ratings of excellent or outstanding, suddenly included a litany of criticisms I'd never heard before. I was resistant to feedback. I lacked strategic vision. I was difficult to work with. I didn't demonstrate leadership potential. None of it was true, but it was all documented in my official personnel file now. I started keeping my own documentation. After every meeting with Greg, I'd return to my office and write detailed notes, date, time, who was present, what was said, what the context was. Every email from him I saved in a dedicated folder. Every criticism I documented along with evidence that contradicted it. I also started talking quietly to other people in the company, carefully, selectively. That's how I learned about Michelle Santos. Michelle had been the director of business development until 2 years earlier. She'd left abruptly, and the official story was that she'd accepted a position at a competitor. But something about the departure had always seemed off to me. Michelle had been successful, well-liked, and by all accounts happy at the company. Why would she suddenly leave? I reached out to her through LinkedIn, asked if she'd be willing to meet for coffee. We met on a Saturday morning at a cafe in Fremont. Michelle was hesitant at first, clearly unsure why I'd contacted her. But when I told her what was happening to me, the dinner invitation, the rejection, the retaliation, her expression changed completely. She said he did the exact same thing to me. Michelle's story was nearly identical to mine. Greg had made advances. She'd declined professionally. He'd retaliated by undermining her work, excluding her from opportunities, and creating such a hostile environment that she felt she had no choice but to leave. She'd filed an HR complaint before leaving. Tom Carlson had conducted what Michelle described as a perfunctory investigation that consisted of asking Greg if the allegations were true. Greg had denied everything. Tom had concluded there was no evidence of wrongdoing and suggested that Michelle might be more comfortable pursuing opportunities elsewhere. Facing continued retaliation and no support from HR, Michelle had accepted a severance package and left. I asked if the severance package included a non-disclosure agreement. It did. Michelle wasn't supposed to talk about any of this. But she told me anyway. She said she'd always felt guilty about staying silent. If she'd spoken up more forcefully, maybe Greg wouldn't have done this to someone else. Maybe I could have been spared. I told her this wasn't her fault. The system had failed her. She'd tried to do the right thing and been punished for it. Michelle gave me a copy of her HR complaint. She'd kept it despite the NDA, knowing it might matter someday. Reading her complaint was like reading my own story written 2 years earlier. The inappropriate advances, the professional retaliation, the HR failure, the forced exit. I realized Greg had done this before, and if he'd done it to Michelle and to me, he'd probably done it to others. I needed to find them. Over the next 3 months, I quietly researched every woman who'd left the company during Greg's tenure as CEO. I looked for patterns, sudden departures, women who'd been successful and then were gone, exits that didn't quite make sense. I found 2 more. Sarah Kim had worked in finance. She'd left 3 years ago. Jennifer Williams had worked in operations. She'd left 4 years ago. I reached out to both of them, carefully explaining who I was and why I was asking. Both agreed to talk to me. Both had similar stories. Sarah told me Greg had propositioned her at an industry conference. When she declined, he'd started questioning her work, undermining her with her team, and eventually pushing her out. Jennifer's story involved Greg making comments about her appearance, inviting her to after-work drinks repeatedly, and then retaliating when she'd filed an HR complaint. Tom Carlson had dismissed her complaint just as he'd dismissed Michelle's. Neither Sarah nor Jennifer had signed NDAs. They'd simply found other jobs and left, glad to escape a toxic situation. The pattern was undeniable. Greg Thompson had been sexually harassing women and retaliating against them for at least 6 years. When they complained, Tom Carlson protected Greg and dismissed their concerns. When they left, the company stayed quiet and moved on. And Greg kept doing it. I had a choice to make. I could leave, like the others had. Find another job. Escape the hostile environment. Start fresh somewhere else. Or I could stay and fight. I thought about the next woman. The one who would come after me. The one who would reject Greg's advances and face the same retaliation I was facing. How many women would Greg victimize before someone finally stopped him? I decided to stay, to document, to build a case so comprehensive and undeniable that even Tom Carlson and a complicit HR department couldn't dismiss it. But I needed more than historical complaints from women who'd already left. I needed current, concrete evidence of ongoing misconduct. That's when I started paying attention to Ashley Chen. Ashley was 23 years old, fresh out of college, enthusiastic and ambitious. She joined Tech Vision 6 months earlier as a junior marketing coordinator on my team. She was bright, creative, eager to learn. She was also young, attractive, and exactly the type Greg seemed to target. I started noticing the way Greg interacted with her. At company meetings, he'd single her out for praise. He'd ask her opinion on things that were clearly beyond her level of responsibility. He'd compliment her work effusively, often right in front of me. At first, I thought I might be paranoid, seeing patterns where none existed because I was hypersensitive after what had happened to me. But then I noticed the one-on-one meetings. Greg's calendar, which was visible to certain people in the company, started showing regular meetings with Ashley, late afternoon meetings, early evening meetings, meetings labeled marketing strategy discussion and campaign planning session. These meetings always seemed to happen after most people had left for the day. I tried to warn Ashley, subtly. I mentioned that Greg could be difficult to work with, that she should be careful about being alone with him, that if she ever felt uncomfortable, my door was always open. Ashley smiled and thanked me. She said Greg had been incredibly supportive, that he was mentoring her, that she felt lucky to have a CEO who took such personal interest in developing young talent. I couldn't say more without revealing what I knew, so I just told her I was there if she needed anything. Then I started staying late at the office myself, working in my office with the door open, watching. I saw them leave together, multiple times, around 7 or 8 in the evening. They'd walk to the parking garage together and get into Greg's car. Maybe they were going to dinner to discuss work. Maybe it was innocent, but my instincts said otherwise. Then I got access to something I wasn't supposed to see. I was in a budget meeting with Karen Liu, our finance director. She pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop to show me some marketing expense trends, then stepped out to take an urgent phone call. Her screen was still visible. While waiting for her to return, my eyes drifted across the spreadsheet. A highlighted section caught my attention. CEO discretionary expenses, hotel charges, multiple entries over the past several months, always at the same hotel, the Fairmont Olympic, always on weeknights, always charged to the corporate card. Greg lived in Bellevue, a suburb about 20 minutes from downtown Seattle. Our office was downtown. There was no legitimate business reason for Greg to need hotel rooms in the city where he worked, unless he was using them for something personal. I pulled out my phone and quickly took a photo of the screen before Karen returned. Later that evening, I cross-referenced the hotel charge dates with Greg's calendar. Every single hotel charge corresponded to a night when Greg had a late meeting on his calendar, and several of those late meetings were scheduled with Ashley. The affair was happening, and Greg was using company money to pay for hotel rooms. That wasn't just harassment. That was fraud. Theft of company resources. I needed more proof, but I didn't have direct access to Greg's expense reports or credit card statements. Then I got lucky in a way I never expected. Our company's expense reporting system had a quirk. When expense reports were submitted, the system automatically routed them via email to various people for approval, finance managers, department heads, sometimes random people if the routing rules glitched. I was occasionally included in these email chains because I managed a significant marketing budget, and the system sometimes pulled in anyone with budget authority. One Tuesday morning, I opened my email and found an expense report attached that I definitely wasn't supposed to see. Gregory Thompson's monthly expenses. It was clearly a system error, but there it was. I opened it immediately. 6 hotel charges at the Fairmont Olympic, all on weeknights, total $3,400, all claimed under the category Client Entertainment and Business Development. There were no client names listed, no specific business purposes documented, just vague justifications about relationship building and strategic discussions. I downloaded the file immediately and saved it in an encrypted folder on my personal laptop. Over the next 5 months, I received 4 more of Greg's expense reports through the same system glitch. I saved every single one. The pattern was consistent and damning. Hotels, expensive dinners for 2 at romantic restaurants, wine purchases, flowers delivered to the hotel. None of it had any legitimate business purpose. Total fraudulent expenses I documented from these reports, $85,000 over an 18-month period. Greg Thompson was stealing company money to fund an affair with a subordinate employee. Meanwhile, Ashley's career was advancing at a pace that made no sense for someone with her limited experience. 3 months after what I suspected was the start of her affair with Greg, Ashley was promoted from junior coordinator to senior coordinator, a jump that normally took 2 years she'd achieved in less than 6 months. Her salary increased by $18,000. 2 months later, she was promoted again, from senior coordinator to marketing manager, a role that typically required 5 to 7 years of experience. Ashley had less than a year. Another raise, $25,000 this time. Both promotions were approved personally by Greg, bypassing the normal review process that would have involved me, her direct supervisor. The favoritism was blatant. Ashley was being rewarded for the affair. I felt sick watching it happen, not because I was jealous of her career advancement. I knew it was built on a foundation that would eventually collapse, but because I knew what would happen when Greg eventually tired of her, or when she finally figured out what was really going on. She'd be discarded, and if she complained or made problems, she'd face the same retaliation the rest of us had faced. Ashley was being used, and she probably had no idea. I kept documenting everything. Hotel receipts, promotion paperwork, calendar entries, pay raise authorizations. I built a timeline that showed precisely when the affair had begun and how Ashley's career trajectory had changed immediately afterward. By November, I had a comprehensive dossier, 18 months of hotel receipts proving Greg was using company funds for personal purposes, calendar evidence showing patterns of late meetings with Ashley, promotion and compensation records showing favoritism, my own performance reviews documenting the retaliation I'd faced, Michelle's HR complaint from 2 years ago, showing a pattern of behavior, Contact information for Sarah and Jennifer, two other women who'd experienced similar treatment. I had everything I needed to go to the board of directors and demand an investigation, but I knew how these situations typically played out. I'd file a complaint. The board would hire an outside law firm to investigate. The investigation would be quiet and discreet. Greg would hire expensive lawyers. He'd claim everything was a misunderstanding. The board would want to avoid scandal. They'd offer Greg a retirement package with a generous payout. He'd leave quietly with his reputation mostly intact. The women he'd harmed would get nothing except maybe small settlements with non-disclosure agreements attached. Ashley would be quietly let go to avoid the appearance of impropriety. I'd probably be thanked for my courage and then gradually pushed out because I'd become inconvenient. That's how these things always ended in corporate America. The powerful man got a golden parachute. The women got silence. I wanted something different. I wanted consequences that actually mattered. I wanted Greg Thompson to face public accountability for what he'd done. I just needed the right moment, the right venue, the right approach. That's when I learned about the Secret Santa exchange at the annual Christmas party. TechVision's Christmas party was one of the company's most important traditions. It had been happening every December for 15 years, long before Greg became CEO. The event was lavish. The company rented a ballroom at the Grand Olympic Hotel, hired caterers, had an open bar with premium wines and craft cocktails, a live band played holiday music, awards were given for employee achievements, and the highlight of every party was the Secret Santa gift exchange. Participation was voluntary, but most employees joined in. You'd submit your name in early December. Names were randomly drawn and sent via email. There was a $50 spending limit. The gifts were opened publicly at the party, one by one in front of everyone. Greg loved the Secret Santa tradition. He participated every year. He loved being the master of ceremonies, calling out names, watching people open their gifts, making jokes, and keeping the energy high. It was his moment to be the beloved, approachable CEO, the guy who cared about company culture and employee happiness. The party was scheduled for Friday, December 20th. Names would be drawn and distributed via email on Monday, December 2nd. I signed up to participate. When the email arrived on December 2nd with my Secret Santa assignment, I opened it with my heart pounding. Gregory Thompson, CEO. I'd drawn Greg's name. The moment I saw it, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I had 18 days to prepare. I went to Best Buy and purchased a basic SanDisk 16 GB USB drive, $4.73. At home that evening, I created a folder structure on the drive and began transferring files. Folder 1, hotel receipts and expense reports. I included all 5 of Greg's expense reports I'd obtained. I created a summary document highlighting every hotel charge, every romantic dinner, every fraudulent expense. I color-coded the entries, red for hotel rooms, orange for dinners, yellow for other personal expenses charged to the company. Total fraudulent expenses clearly calculated at the top, $85,432. Folder 2. Calendar evidence and affair documentation. Screenshots of Greg's calendar showing late meetings with Ashley, cross-references showing which meetings corresponded to hotel charges, a timeline showing when the meetings started and when they increased in frequency. Folder 3. Ashley Chen Favoritism. Her promotion paperwork showing 2 rapid promotions in less than a year. Salary increase authorizations totaling $43,000. Comparison documents showing normal promotion timelines for similar positions, demonstrating that Ashley's advancement was wildly outside standard practices. A side-by-side timeline. Affair begins. First promotion happens 2 weeks later. Relationship continues. Second promotion happens 3 months later. Folder 4. Rachel Morrison Retaliation. My performance reviews. The before and after was stark. 3 years of excellent and outstanding ratings. Then suddenly, after June 16th, ratings dropped to needs improvement and concerns about leadership capability. Emails from Greg praising my work prior to June. Emails from Greg criticizing identical work after June. Documentation of being excluded from executive leadership meetings. Calendar evidence showing my standing one-on-one meetings being canceled. A memo detailing the VP promotion I'd been promised and how it had been given to an external hire immediately after I declined Greg's dinner invitation. Folder 5, Pattern of Abuse, Historical Evidence. Michelle Santos HR complaint from 2 years earlier. her severance agreement with its NDA clause, contact information, and brief written statements from Sarah Kim and Jennifer Williams describing their experiences. A document I'd created showing the pattern. Woman rejects Greg's advances. Greg retaliates professionally. Woman complains to HR. Tom Carlson dismisses complaint. Woman leaves company. 4 women over 6 years. A clear, documented pattern.
Folder 6, Legal Violations Summary.
A detailed memo I'd written summarizing the legal issues: sexual harassment, retaliation, fraud and theft of company resources, abuse of power, breach of fiduciary duty. Citations to relevant employment laws and company policies Greg had violated, estimated damages and potential liability. Folder 7, Recommended Actions. A draft complaint to the Board of Directors. A draft complaint to the Washington State Human Rights Commission. Contact information for an employment attorney I'd consulted. Recommended steps for a proper investigation. Everything was organized, documented, cross-referenced. It was a complete case file. Everything needed to end Greg Thompson's career. All on a $4 USB drive. I wrapped it carefully. Gold wrapping paper with an elegant pattern. Red velvet ribbon tied in a perfect bow. It looked expensive and thoughtful. I created a card on heavy cream cardstock. In elegant script, I wrote, "Your performance review. Merry Christmas, Secret Santa." The message had 2 meanings. On the surface, it seemed like a playful joke, an employee giving the CEO a performance review for Secret Santa. Amusing, slightly cheeky, but harmless. But Greg would understand the real meaning the moment he saw what was on that drive. I was giving him his actual performance review, and he had failed catastrophically. The days leading up to the party were surreal. I went to work, attended meetings, managed my team, all while knowing that in my desk drawer was a USB drive that would detonate Greg's entire career. Several times I questioned myself. Was I doing the right thing? Was this too public, too harsh? Should I try the traditional channels first? But every time I wavered, I thought about Michelle, about Sarah, about Jennifer, about Ashley, who still didn't understand she was being used. And I thought about the next woman, the one who would come after all of us if Greg wasn't stopped. The party was on Friday evening. I spent the day trying to focus on work and failing completely. My assistant asked if I was feeling all right. I said I was just tired. At 5 o'clock, I went home to change. I chose a black cocktail dress, professional but elegant. I wanted to look composed, put together, in control. I felt anything but in control. My hands shook as I applied my makeup. My stomach churned with anxiety. I picked up the wrapped gift from my dresser. It felt impossibly light for something that would carry so much weight. I drove to the Grand Olympic Hotel and parked in the garage. Sat in my car for 5 minutes, breathing deeply, steeling myself for what was about to happen. Then I walked into the hotel, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and entered the ballroom. The party was already in full swing. 200 people mingled with drinks and appetizers. Holiday music played. The room was decorated with white lights, evergreen garlands, and red poinsettias. I checked my gift in at the Secret Santa table. A volunteer took it and placed it with a growing pile of wrapped packages. I got a glass of wine and found a spot near the back of the room where I could watch without being too visible. Greg was in his element, working the room, shaking hands, laughing loudly at people's jokes, playing the role of beloved CEO. His wife Patricia was with him. She was elegant in a navy dress, smiling politely as Greg introduced her to employees. I wondered if she knew, if she had any idea what her husband had been doing. Ashley was there too. She wore a red dress and stayed close to Greg's orbit, though not obviously so. She'd glance at him frequently. He'd catch her eye and smile. It was subtle, but once you knew what to look for, it was obvious. Dinner was served at 7. We sat at assigned tables. I was with my marketing team, which was fine. They were good people. We talked about holiday plans and kept things light. At 8:30, after dinner and dessert, Greg took the microphone at the front of the room. He thanked everyone for their hard work during the year, announced some company achievements, recognized several employees for outstanding performance. Then he announced it was time for Secret Santa. The room buzzed with excitement. This was always the favorite part of the party. Greg explained the rules, even though everyone knew them. Names would be called. You'd come up, select your gift from the pile, and open it in front of everyone. The gifts started being distributed. People opened theirs one by one. Coffee mugs with funny sayings, wine bottle holders, desk accessories, gift cards, the usual assortment of office-appropriate presents. Laughter, applause, good-natured jokes. I watched it all in a daze, barely registering what was happening. My entire focus was on the pile of gifts, on the gold-wrapped package with the red ribbon. About 20 minutes into the exchange, Greg's name was called. He smiled broadly, made a show of walking to the gift table, surveyed the remaining packages like he was making a difficult choice.
Then he selected the gold-wrapped one with the red ribbon.
My gift. He held it up for everyone to see. Beautiful wrapping, he said into the microphone. Someone put real effort into this. People chuckled. He opened the card first. Read it aloud in an amused tone. Your performance review. Merry Christmas. Secret Santa. Laughter rippled through the room. People thought it was funny. The CEO getting a performance review from an anonymous employee. Greg grinned. Well, I hope it's a good review.
More laughter.
He unwrapped the package, opened the small box, pulled out the USB drive. He looked at it with mild confusion, held it up. A USB drive. Mysterious. Someone called out, "What's on it?" Greg smiled. "Let's find out, shall we?" There was a laptop on the presentation table next to him. It was connected to the projector system that had been displaying a holiday photo slideshow during dinner. Greg walked over to the laptop and plugged in the USB drive. The screen changed. The holiday photos disappeared. In their place, the file structure of the USB drive. 7 folders, clearly labeled hotel receipts and expense reports, calendar evidence and affair documentation, Ashley Chen favoritism, Rachel Morrison retaliation, pattern of abuse, historical evidence, legal violations summary, recommended actions. The ballroom, which had been buzzing with conversation and laughter, went silent. People were reading the folder names projected on the giant screen behind Greg. Greg's face changed. The smile disappeared. He looked at the screen, then down at the laptop, then back at the screen. He reached for the laptop, trying to close it or disconnect the projector. But it was too late. Everyone had seen. Phones were already out. People were taking photos of the screen. A voice from the crowd. "Hotel receipts? What is that?" Another voice. "Affair documentation?" Greg's hands fumbled with the laptop. His voice was tight when he spoke into the microphone. "There's been some kind of mistake. Technical issue. I stood up. My voice was calm, loud enough to carry across the silent ballroom. "No mistake, Greg. That's my Secret Santa gift to you. Your actual performance review. 18 months of documentation. Everything you've been doing. All the women you've harassed. All the company money you've stolen." Every single person in the room turned to look at me. Greg stared at me from the front of the room. His face had gone pale. "Rachel, I don't know what you think." I cut him off. "Hotel rooms at the Fairmont Olympic. 18 months of them. $85,000 charged to company accounts. All for an affair with Ashley Chen, who you've promoted twice in less than a year, with salary increases totaling $43,000. All documented." Gasps throughout the room. Heads turned toward Ashley, who looked stricken. I continued, my voice steady and clear. "Performance reviews weaponized against women who rejected your sexual advances. Me, Michelle Santos, Sarah Kim, Jennifer Williams. A 6-year pattern of harassment and retaliation. All documented." Greg tried to speak. "This is completely inappropriate. We should discuss this." "You made it impossible to discuss anything," I said. My voice was stronger now. "I tried professional channels. I tried HR. The system protected you. Tom Carlson protected you. You've been doing this for 6 years and getting away with it. So yes, I'm doing this publicly, because you need to be held accountable, and private accountability has never worked with you." I looked around the room, saw board members, saw Tom Carlson, the HR director, who looked like he wanted to disappear, saw Patricia Thompson, Greg's wife, standing with her hand over her mouth, tears in her eyes. Everything on that USB drive is documented, dated, verified. I have copies. My attorney has copies. You can try to spin this however you want, but the evidence is overwhelming. Greg stood frozen at the front of the room, still holding the USB drive. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. 200 people staring, waiting. One of the board members stood up. Her name was Patricia Way. and she was the chair of the board's audit committee. Her voice cut through the silence with absolute authority. Greg, I think you need to come with me, right now. It wasn't a request. Greg looked around the room like a trapped animal. His eyes landed on his wife, Patricia, who was gathering her coat and purse. Pat, wait, he started. She didn't wait. She walked toward the exit, without looking at him, without saying a word. Greg turned back to Patricia Way, the board chair. I can explain all of this. If we could just discuss it privately. That's exactly what we're going to do, Patricia Way said, in the conference room. Now, Martin, Diana, please join us. She'd addressed two other board members, who stood and followed her toward the ballroom. Exit. Greg had no choice. He disconnected the USB drive from the laptop, slipped it into his pocket, and followed the board members out of the ballroom. He walked right past me, didn't make eye contact, didn't speak. The moment he left, the room exploded with noise. Everyone talking at once. Shocked conversations. People pulling out phones to text or call people who weren't there. Ashley Chen had disappeared. I didn't see where she went. Tom Carlson, the HR director, was standing against the wall, looking like he might be sick. Two employees were already approaching him with angry questions. People approached me. Some supportive, some uncomfortable, some clearly angry that I'd made a scene. A woman from engineering hugged me and said thank you. He did something similar to me 3 years ago, but I was too scared to say anything. A man from sales said, "This was really inappropriate. You should have handled this privately." I didn't have the energy to argue with him. One of the board members who hadn't gone with Patricia Way approached me. His name was James Chen. He was the board's governance committee chair. Rachel, I realize this is probably the worst possible time to ask, but would you be willing to meet with the board on Monday morning? We're going to need a full accounting of everything you've documented. I said yes. The party was effectively over. People started leaving. The hotel staff looked confused, unsure whether to continue serving drinks or start cleaning up. I left my wine glass on a table and walked out to the parking garage. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could calm down enough to drive. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. I'd exposed Greg Thompson in front of the entire company. I'd made it public. Impossible to sweep under the rug. Impossible to handle quietly. I drove home in a daze. My husband Mark was waiting up for me. "How was the party?" he asked. I started laughing. Couldn't help it. The question was so absurd given what had just happened. Then the laughter turned into crying. Mark held me while I sobbed on our living room couch. I'd been carrying this weight for 18 months. Documenting, planning, waiting for the right moment. And now it was done. The weight was gone, but I had no idea what would come next. The weekend was surreal. My phone exploded with messages. Some supportive, some hostile, some from reporters who'd somehow gotten my number and wanted a statement. I turned off my phone Saturday afternoon and didn't turn it back on until Sunday evening. Mark asked if I was okay, if I regretted what I'd done. I told him I didn't know yet. Ask me in a week. Monday morning, I arrived at the office at 8. The building felt different, tense. Everyone was talking about Friday night. I went straight to the conference room where I'd been told to meet the board. Patricia Way was there, James Chen, 3 other board members, the company's external legal counsel, a woman named Catherine Brooks. Greg wasn't there, neither was Tom Carlson. They asked me to walk them through everything. I did. I'd prepared a detailed written statement over the weekend. I gave them each a copy. I also gave them a complete copy of everything that had been on the USB drive, plus additional documentation that hadn't fit. They listened, asked questions, took notes. Patricia Way said Greg had been suspended with pay pending a full investigation. Tom Carlson had also been suspended. The board was hiring an outside law firm to conduct a comprehensive investigation into all allegations. They wanted to interview me formally as part of that investigation. I said I'd cooperate fully. James Chen said something I hadn't expected. "Rachel, on behalf of the board, I want to apologize. This should never have happened. When you or others tried to raise concerns, we should have listened. We should have protected you. We failed in our oversight duties. I'm sorry." I appreciated the apology, but it didn't change what had happened. The investigation took 8 weeks. During that time, Greg remained suspended. Tom Carlson was also on leave. The board brought in an interim CEO and an interim HR director. The law firm they hired was thorough. They interviewed me for 6 hours across 2 sessions. They interviewed Ashley, they interviewed Michelle Santos, Sarah Kim, and Jennifer Williams. They interviewed dozens of current and former employees asking about the culture, about Greg's behavior, about HR's responsiveness to complaints. They hired a forensic accountant to audit Greg's expenses for the past 5 years. They examined every personnel decision Greg had made in the past 7 years. The investigation process itself had been intense and invasive in ways I hadn't anticipated. The law firm conducting it, Morrison and Associates, no relation to me, assigned 3 attorneys and 2 forensic investigators to the case. They treated it with the seriousness of a criminal investigation because in many ways it was. My first formal interview with them lasted 6 hours. They recorded everything, asked me to walk through every interaction with Greg in chronological order, every email, every meeting, every instance of retaliation. They asked uncomfortable questions. How did I feel when Greg made the dinner invitation? Had I ever given him any indication that his attention might be welcome? Was I certain I hadn't misinterpreted anything? I understood why they had to ask. They needed to build an airtight case, but it still felt like being on trial myself. They asked about the USB drive. How long had I been planning it? Had I considered other options? Did I understand that my approach was unconventional and potentially risky? I told them the truth. I'd considered every option. Private complaint to HR, Tom Carlson had demonstrated that was useless. Complaint to the board, they'd likely offer Greg a quiet retirement. Legal action, expensive, time-consuming, and Greg had far more resources than I did. The public revelation at the Christmas party was the only option that guaranteed the truth couldn't be buried. They asked if I'd consulted an attorney before taking that action. I said yes. My attorney had advised me that everything I was planning to reveal was documented fact, and therefore not defamatory, but that there could be professional consequences for such a public confrontation. I'd accepted that risk. The investigators interviewed Ashley Chen for 8 hours across 2 days. I wasn't present for her interviews, but I heard from others that she'd been devastated. She genuinely believed Greg cared about her potential, believed the promotions were based on merit, believed the relationship was special. Learning that she was just the latest in a decade-long pattern of affairs had shattered something in her. The investigators found text messages between Greg and Ashley on company phones, messages that made the nature of their relationship explicit, messages that showed Greg making promises about her career advancement, messages that proved the quid pro quo. They also found similar messages from previous affairs. Greg had been careless, arrogant. He'd never believed he'd be caught. Michelle Santos flew in from San Francisco for her interview. She told me later that finally being heard, finally having someone take her complaint seriously, was healing in a way she hadn't expected. The investigators found her original HR complaint in the company files, found Tom Carlson's dismissive investigation notes, found evidence that Tom had actively discouraged Michelle from pursuing the matter further. They found similar patterns with Sarah Kim and Jennifer Williams. Complaints filed, cursory investigations, dismissals. The forensic accountant they brought in was relentless. He didn't just look at the expense reports I'd flagged. He went back 5 years and examined every single expense Greg had submitted. He found patterns of fraud I hadn't discovered. Personal purchases disguised as business expenses. Meals with family members claimed as client entertainment. Hotel rooms in cities where Greg had no business purpose. The total came to $138,000. 5 years of systematic theft. The accountant also examined Ashley's compensation and promotion history. He calculated that her salary increases and bonuses totaled $63,000 beyond what someone with her experience and performance would normally receive. That favoritism had a dollar value, and it came from company resources. When the investigation findings were presented to the board, Patricia Way told me later that several board members were visibly shaken. They'd known Greg for years, respected him. Some considered him a friend. Learning the truth about who he really was had been difficult for them. But the evidence was overwhelming. There was no defending him, no explaining it away. The vote to terminate him for cause was unanimous. The final report was delivered to the board in mid-February. It was over 300 pages long. I wasn't allowed to see the full report, but Patricia Way gave me a summary of the findings. Greg Thompson had engaged in a pattern of sexual harassment spanning 10 years. At least 8 women had been targeted. 5 had faced retaliation after rejecting his advances or filing complaints. Greg had submitted fraudulent expense reports totaling $138,000 over 5 years. The $85,000 I'd documented was only the most recent portion. He'd promoted at least 3 women he'd had affairs with, using company authority and resources inappropriately. The HR department, under Tom Carlson's leadership, had received and dismissed at least 6 formal complaints about Greg over the years. Tom had actively suppressed information to protect Greg. The board voted unanimously to terminate Greg for cause. No severance package, no payout of any kind. His unvested stock options were forfeited. His deferred compensation was canceled. He was also required to repay the full $138,000 in fraudulent expenses. Tom Carlson was also terminated for cause. 2 other HR staff members who'd been involved in suppressing complaints were let go. The company offered financial settlements to Michelle, Sarah, and Jennifer. The terms were confidential, but Michelle told me later it was substantial and came with a formal apology. Ashley Chen was allowed to keep her job, but her salary was adjusted to be more appropriate for her actual experience level. Her reporting structure was changed, so she no longer worked in marketing. She was moved to a different department entirely. I never spoke to Ashley directly about what happened. She avoided me in the office. Eventually, she left the company about 6 months later. I heard she went to graduate school. I was offered the vice president of marketing position, the role I'd been promised, the role I'd earned years ago. I accepted. I was also given a significant raise, a one-time bonus, and a formal apology from the board for the retaliation I'd endured. The new CEO, a woman named Dr. Sarah Patel, who'd been recruited from outside, personally thanked me. She said what I'd done had likely saved the company from catastrophic liability down the road, that my courage had created an opportunity to fix a broken culture. Greg Thompson tried to fight his termination. He hired an attorney who sent threatening letters about wrongful termination and defamation. The company's lawyers responded with a simple message: "We have overwhelming documented evidence of cause for termination. We welcome the opportunity to present it all in open court." Greg's attorney never responded after that. The threatened lawsuit never materialized. I learned more about Greg's unraveling through various sources over the following months. His termination made the local business news. The Seattle Times ran a story about the CEO of a prominent tech company being fired for harassment and fraud. They didn't name Greg initially, but enough details were public that people in the industry knew exactly who it was. Tech blogs picked up the story. Industry gossip networks spread it further. Within weeks, everyone in Seattle's tech community knew what Greg Thompson had done. He tried to control the narrative. He hired a PR firm to help manage his reputation. They issued a statement saying Greg had been the victim of false allegations by a disgruntled employee and that the truth would eventually come out. But the truth was already out, and the evidence was documented. Several people who knew Greg reached out to me privately, former colleagues, people who'd worked with him at previous companies. They all said the same thing. They weren't surprised. There had always been whispers about his behavior with women, but no one had been willing to speak up. Now they were willing to talk. One woman told me Greg had harassed her at his previous company 15 years ago. She'd left rather than file a complaint because she'd been young and scared and didn't think anyone would believe her. Another man said he'd witnessed Greg make inappropriate comments to young female employees at industry conferences. He'd thought it was just Greg being socially awkward. Now he realized it was predatory. The pattern extended back further than I'd known. Greg hadn't suddenly become an abuser when he joined TechVision. He'd been doing this his entire career. His divorce from Patricia was ugly. She hired an aggressive attorney who made sure the infidelity clause in their prenup was enforced to its full extent. Greg lost the house they'd lived in for 18 years, a beautiful craftsman in Bellevue, worth over $2 million. Patricia got it. He got nothing. He lost most of his retirement accounts, lost his stock portfolio, lost access to their vacation home in Palm Springs. Patricia also ensured that their daughter Emma, who was 16 at the time, understood exactly why the divorce was happening. She didn't shield Emma from the truth. Emma was angry at first, angry at everyone, angry at Greg for what he'd done, angry at Patricia for divorcing him, angry at me for exposing him. But over time, as she matured and understood more, her anger focused where it belonged, on Greg. She changed her last name legally when she turned 18, went from Emma Thompson to Emma Fletcher, using Patricia's maiden name. She gave an interview to her college newspaper a few years later, I read it online, where she talked about growing up with a father who presented one image publicly and was someone completely different privately. She said learning the truth had been painful but necessary, that she'd had to grieve the father she thought she had and accept the reality of who he actually was. She said she didn't have a relationship with him anymore, that she'd tried, but he'd never taken real responsibility for what he'd done. He'd always positioned himself as the victim. She couldn't have a relationship with someone who refused to acknowledge the harm they'd caused. Reading that interview broke my heart for her. She'd lost her father, not to death, but to his own moral failures. That's a unique kind of grief. Greg tried to find work in Seattle's tech industry. He was unemployable. Every company that considered him discovered the truth during reference checks. No one would touch him. He tried consulting, set up a LinkedIn profile offering strategic advisory services, posted thought leadership articles trying to rebuild his reputation. The comments on his posts were brutal. People calling him out, asking about the harassment, asking about the fraud. He eventually made his profile private and stopped posting. He moved to Scottsdale, Arizona about 18 months after his termination, probably hoping to start fresh somewhere people didn't know his history. But the internet is forever. A simple Google search of his name brought up the Seattle Times article, the blog posts, the Whisper Network. Last I heard, he was doing some kind of independent contract work for small companies. Remote work, nothing prestigious, nothing that matched the career he'd had. He'd gone from CEO of a successful tech company to a cautionary tale, from respected leader to industry pariah. His downfall was complete, and it was entirely self-inflicted. Greg's wife, Patricia, divorced him. Their prenuptial agreement had an infidelity clause. She got their house, majority custody of their teenage daughter, and a significant portion of their assets. Greg's reputation in the Seattle tech community was destroyed. The story had spread quickly. He was unemployable at any reputable company. The last I heard, he'd moved to Arizona and was doing some kind of independent consulting work, working remotely, alone, diminished. His daughter, according to people who knew the family, had changed her last name to her mother's maiden name. She was embarrassed by him, wanted distance from his scandal. The life Greg had built, the power, the prestige, the respect was gone, destroyed by his own actions and by a $4 USB drive that documented them all. The aftermath for me was complicated in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Professionally, I thrived. I was finally in the role I deserved. My team was talented and motivated. The new CEO trusted me. I had real authority and the respect of my peers. But personally, it took a toll that surprised me. Some colleagues viewed me as a hero. They thanked me privately for having the courage to speak up. They said I'd made the workplace safer. Others were uncomfortable around me. They thought I'd been too aggressive, too public, that I should have handled it through proper channels. What they didn't understand was that proper channels had been failing women for a decade, that private complaints had been systematically dismissed, that the system was designed to protect Greg, not us. Some people whispered that I must have had a personal vendetta, that maybe I'd been rejected and wanted revenge. Those whispers hurt more than I'd expected. I started seeing a therapist, talking through everything that had happened, the harassment, the documentation, the 18 months of living with the stress of what I was planning, the aftermath. Therapy became a crucial part of my healing process in ways I hadn't expected. I'd always thought of therapy as something for people with serious mental health issues, depression, anxiety disorders, trauma from childhood. I didn't think workplace problems qualified. But my therapist, Dr. Lisa Chen, helped me understand that trauma comes in many forms. That systematic workplace abuse being undermined, gaslit, professionally sabotaged over 18 months creates real psychological harm. She explained that what I'd experienced had similarities to emotional abuse in personal relationships. The pattern of Greg's behavior, targeting me, testing boundaries, retaliating when I set them, systematically destroying my professional confidence, all of it was psychologically damaging. And carrying the weight of documenting everything, planning the exposure, knowing I was going to detonate someone's career in a very public way that had created its own stress. I'd been living in a constant state of vigilance for 18 months, always watching, always documenting, always aware that one mistake could undermine everything I was building. That kind of sustained stress has real effects on your nervous system. Dr. Chen taught me about hypervigilance, the state of being constantly alert for threats. She explained that after months of operating in that mode, my body didn't know how to turn it off. Even after Greg was gone, I was still on edge, still waiting for the other shoe to drop, still scanning for threats that no longer existed. We worked on techniques to help my nervous system recalibrate. Breathing exercises, mindfulness practices, learning to recognize when I was responding to present reality versus past patterns. It took months, but gradually I started to feel safer, started to relax, started to trust that the crisis was actually over. We also processed the complicated emotions around what I'd done. I didn't feel guilty about exposing Greg. He deserved it, but I did feel guilt about the collateral damage. Ashley's humiliation, Emma losing her father, Patricia's divorce, the other employees whose Christmas party had been ruined. Dr. Chen helped me understand that I could acknowledge those harms while also recognizing that I wasn't responsible for them. Greg was responsible. His choices created all of this. I'd simply revealed the truth. But still, knowing intellectually that I wasn't responsible didn't always stop me from feeling the weight of it. We talked about the isolation that came with being seen as difficult or aggressive, the colleagues who avoided me now, the whispers that I'd been too harsh. Dr. Chen validated that those reactions were painful while also helping me see them as reflecting other people's discomfort with accountability, not a reflection of my worth. Some people prefer to pretend problems don't exist. When you force them to confront uncomfortable truths, they get angry at you rather than at the person who created the problem. That's not your fault. That's their inability to handle complexity. The therapy also helped me process my feelings about the women who'd come before me. Michelle, Sarah, Jennifer. I felt guilty sometimes that I'd succeeded where they'd failed, that I'd had resources and circumstances they hadn't, that my victory came after they'd already lost. Dr. Chen reframed it. I hadn't succeeded instead of them. I'd succeeded because of them. Michelle's documentation had shown me there was a pattern. Sarah and Jennifer's willingness to talk had given me corroboration. Their courage had enabled mine. We were all part of the same fight. Some battles are won early, some late, but we were all warriors. That reframing helped. I started seeing myself less as an individual hero and more as part of a collective resistance. Dr. Chen also helped me think about what I wanted my story to mean going forward. Did I want to be defined by what happened? Did I want the woman who exposed her CEO to become my primary identity? Or did I want to integrate this experience into a larger narrative about my career, my values, my life? I chose integration. Yes, this happened. Yes, it was significant. But it didn't define me entirely. I was still Rachel Morrison, marketing executive. Rachel Morrison, wife and mother. Rachel Morrison, friend and mentor. The exposure of Greg Thompson was one chapter, not the whole book. Therapy gave me tools to write the rest of the story on my own terms. My therapist helped me understand that what I'd experienced was a form of workplace trauma, the constant undermining, the professional gaslighting, the feeling of being powerless in a system that should have protected me. She also helped me recognize that what I'd done at the Christmas party, while necessary and justified, had been its own kind of trauma. Standing up in front of 200 people, making myself vulnerable, knowing I was ending someone's career in a very public way. Even when someone deserves consequences, being the person who delivers them carries a weight. It took me months to fully process everything, to feel like myself again, to stop replaying that moment in the ballroom over and over in my mind. But I did recover. I did heal. And I emerged stronger.
A year after the Christmas party, Tech Vision had transformed. New leadership, new policies, new culture.
We implemented a third-party hotline for harassment complaints that bypassed HR entirely. We made anti-harassment training mandatory quarterly instead of annually. We created clear accountability measures for leadership behavior. I was asked to serve on the committee that developed these new policies. The policy development process took 6 months and involved input from dozens of employees at all levels of the company. We didn't just want to create policies that looked good on paper. We wanted to build systems that actually worked, that actually protected people. One of the first things we did was conduct an anonymous company-wide survey asking about experiences with harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. The responses were eye-opening. 23% of women who responded said they'd experienced some form of sexual harassment at work. Only 4% had reported it formally. When asked why they hadn't reported, the most common answer was, "I didn't think anything would be done about it." That statistic haunted me. 23%, almost 1 in 4 women, and most of them suffering in silence because they didn't trust the system to protect them. We used that data to build better systems. We implemented a third-party hotline run by an independent company that specialized in workplace investigations. Complaints went directly to this outside firm, not to our internal HR. That meant people like Tom Carlson couldn't bury them. We mandated that all harassment complaints be investigated by external attorneys, not internal staff. No more letting people investigate their friends. We created clear timelines for investigations, 30 days maximum unless there were extraordinary circumstances. No more investigations that dragged on indefinitely while nothing changed. We implemented transparency requirements. If someone filed a complaint, they were entitled to know the outcome. Not all the details, but whether the complaint was substantiated and what actions were taken. We changed our severance agreements so they could no longer include NDAs that prevented people from discussing harassment or discrimination. People who left the company could tell their stories. We established an anonymous reporting option for people who wanted to raise concerns about patterns they were witnessing but weren't direct victims. That way, if someone noticed a manager behaving inappropriately with multiple employees, they could report it even if they hadn't personally been targeted. Dr. Patel, our new CEO, made it clear from day one that she would personally review every harassment complaint filed. That leadership took this seriously, that there would be consequences for anyone who violated the policies, regardless of their position in the company. The culture shift was real and tangible. People started speaking up about problems. Managers who'd previously gotten away with inappropriate behavior were held accountable. Several people were terminated in the first year under the new policies. But there was also pushback. Some longtime employees complained that the new policies created a hostile work environment where people were afraid to interact naturally, where any compliment could be misinterpreted as harassment. I found this perspective frustrating. The policies were clear. Treat people professionally. Don't make sexual comments. Don't ask subordinates on romantic dates. Don't retaliate when people say no. If following those guidelines felt restrictive to you, maybe you needed to examine your behavior. We also implemented mandatory training that went beyond the typical 1-hour online module. We brought in expert facilitators who ran interactive sessions about power dynamics, implicit bias, and bystander intervention. Some people rolled their eyes, made jokes about political correctness run amok, but many people found the training genuinely valuable. They learned things they hadn't realized, understood dynamics they hadn't previously recognized. The company also established a mentorship program specifically for women in technical and leadership roles. The goal was to provide support systems and advancement opportunities that had previously been available mostly through informal networks that tended to exclude women. I became a mentor in the program, worked with 3 women at various career stages, helping them navigate challenges and advance their careers. One of them, a woman named Jessica who was a senior engineer, told me that having a mentor who'd been through something difficult and come out stronger gave her confidence that she could do the same. That meant more to me than any promotion or raise. The transformation wasn't perfect. TechVision still had problems, still had people who resisted change, still had moments where the old culture tried to reassert itself. But the foundation was different now. The commitment to doing better was real, and when problems arose, they were addressed rather than ignored. That's what institutional change looks like. Not perfection, but persistent improvement. The board wanted input from someone who'd experienced the failures of the old system. I accepted. It felt like a way to make something positive come from all the pain. Michelle Santos reached out to me a year after everything happened. She'd heard about what I'd done. She thanked me for having the courage she'd felt she lacked. I told her she'd had courage too. She'd filed a complaint, even knowing the system might fail her. She'd kept documentation despite her NDA. She'd talked to me even though it violated her agreement. We met for coffee and talked for 2 hours. It was healing for both of us, to share our experiences, to know we weren't alone. Sarah and Jennifer also reached out. The 4 of us met for dinner one evening. Women who'd survived the same predator, who'd each fought back in our own ways. We formed an unlikely friendship. We still meet occasionally, talk about work, life, how we've moved forward from what happened. None of us regret speaking up, even though it was hard, even though there were costs. Because silence has costs, too, costs that compound, costs that fall on the next woman and the next and the next. I think about Ashley sometimes, wonder how she's doing, whether she's learned from what happened, whether she understands now that Greg never saw her potential, he saw her vulnerability. I hope she's found her way to something better, something real. 2 years after the Christmas party, I'm still at Tech Vision, still VP of Marketing, still leading my team and loving my work. The company is healthier now. The culture is different. People feel safer speaking up about problems. Is it perfect? No, but it's better, much better. I keep the USB drive in my desk drawer, the same one I gave Greg that night. The company's IT department had made copies for the investigation, but they returned the original to me. Sometimes I look at it and think about that moment, standing up in the ballroom, speaking truth in front of 200 people, refusing to be silenced. It was terrifying. It was liberating. It changed everything. Greg Thompson learned that night that power has limits, that protection has conditions, that eventually truth and accountability find everyone. I learned that my voice mattered, that documentation is powerful, that fighting back, even when it's hard, is worth it. The USB drive cost $4.73. The evidence it contained was priceless. The justice it delivered was long overdue. And the message it sent, that harassment has consequences, that retaliation backfires, that women who fight back can win, that message is still resonating. People ask me sometimes if I regret how I did it, if I wish I'd handled it differently, more quietly, more privately. I tell them no. Private complaints had failed for a decade. The system was designed to protect Greg, not the women he harmed. Public accountability was the only accountability that worked. Could I have been more subtle? Sure. Could I have been more diplomatic? Probably. But subtle and diplomatic hadn't worked for Michelle, or Sarah, or Jennifer, or the other women whose complaints Tom Carlson had buried. Sometimes you have to be loud. You have to be bold. You have to make it impossible to ignore. That's what the Christmas party did. It made Greg's behavior impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss, impossible to sweep under the rug. I don't feel guilty about that. I feel proud. There's a new tradition at Tech Vision's Christmas party now. Before the Secret Santa exchange, Dr. Patel, our CEO, gives a brief speech about the importance of speaking up, about creating a culture where people feel safe reporting problems, about holding everyone, including leadership, accountable to high standards. She never mentions Greg by name. She doesn't have to. Everyone knows what she's talking about. Last year, during her speech, she looked directly at me and said, "We're a better company today because someone had the courage to demand better." That courage changed everything. People applauded, some standing ovation. I felt myself getting emotional. Mark, who comes to the party every year now, squeezed my hand. The Secret Santa exchange that followed was joyful, fun, exactly what it was supposed to be. No one was afraid of what might be in the packages. No one was using the tradition to expose corruption. That's what justice looks like. A workplace where Secret Santa can just be Secret Santa, where the traditions are wholesome instead of weaponized. But I'm glad I weaponized it when I needed to, because sometimes the only way to restore normalcy is to disrupt it first. My name is Rachel Morrison. I'm 44 years old now. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Tech Vision Solutions, and I'm the woman who ended a CEO's career with a $4 USB drive, a company Christmas party, and 18 months of meticulous documentation. Some people think I was too harsh, that I embarrassed Greg unnecessarily, that I should have given him a chance to leave with dignity. But dignity is earned, not given, and Greg Thompson had spent a decade destroying women's careers, stealing company money, and abusing his power. He didn't deserve a quiet exit. He deserved exactly what he got: public accountability for public harm. I gave him his performance review. He failed, spectacularly, publicly, permanently.
And Tech Vision is better for it. The women who work here now are safer for it. The culture is healthier for it.
That USB drive sits in my desk drawer as a reminder, not of revenge, but of justice.
Justice for Michelle and Sarah and Jennifer and Ashley and all the other women whose names I'll never know.
Justice that was delayed for far too long, but finally, inevitably arrived.
Merry Christmas, Greg. Your performance review is final.
And you failed.